Subir Grewal is involved with the New York State, are they clubs or Ron Paul groups? Grassroots.
They're called meetup groups.
Meetup groups. And Subir had me, he reached me by phone about, December. And would I like to speak there? I was in New York, and I said, sure. And he set up a meeting with Ron Paul, the Ron Paul Meetup group of New York, in Manhattan. And they got, just like that, he got 35 people together. And we know how hard that is because we try to do it in various cities all the time. It's not that easy, but he could do it. And this group I found very interesting and very open to all of our ideas, most of them. Maybe a couple of people who were Austrian-oriented could not be reached, but the rest could. And so we're going to, Subir was also at the Ron Paul Meetup in Minneapolis, which was held at the same time as the Republican Convention. He'll give us a report on that. And please welcome Mr. Subir Grewal, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to thank him for inviting me to talk about this because this is something that I've been internally debating with myself for over a year now. Debating the harmonies and disharmonies with the Ron Paul people and the American Monetary Institute's views. I got into monetary policy when I was an undergraduate student at New York University studying economics. Wasn't really too much of a vehicle for me to promote it though. And then in January of 2007, I heard about Ron Paul running for president. I heard about him before through my research of monetary policy. Ron Paul, he's actually the ranking Republican on the Domestic Monetary Policy Committee in the House. So he's been on that committee, I think, since the 70s. So he's a pretty well-known figure in the realm of monetary policy. And so as soon as Ron Paul announced that he was running back then, I said, sure, I'm behind this guy. Here's actually someone who's willing to speak up, bring these issues out into the open about the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking. So we started to get involved, and it was really all through the internet. And these things started popping up called meetup groups online. It was totally spontaneous. We had over 2,000 meetup groups nationwide. And I was a part of the New York City group, and that was one of the largest meetup groups in the nation. We had about 1,000 members, just normal people, young, old, Democrats, Republicans, independents, anarchists. They all came together and, grassroots support of Ron Paul. One of the more significant things we did was there was a building owner in the East Village in New York City who wanted to use this building to promote Ron Paul. So we had a few of us from the group paint in big letters on the roof of his building, Google Ron Paul. And planes on their approach to LaGuardia Airport began to notice it, and people told the news. So we had the Fox 5 News chopper go over it and play it on the news and show it. So that was good, and we really got it out in the open. And in New York State, Ron Paul did reasonably well. He got 7%, and it was a primary, not a caucus. So, and that was the best he did in any primary state. Now, Ron Paul's appeal, a lot of people can't explain it. Especially in the mainstream media, they couldn't really figure out why this guy was getting so much grassroots support. I would say that it's because Ron Paul isn't a politician. He is a statesman. And to be a statesman in these times, you really have to be a force. They're not so much comfortable with everything he says. Nobody agrees with Ron Paul on everything. But he's candid, and you know where he stands, and that's why people are comfortable with him. He doesn't support policies as much as he supports ideas. There's actually a biography coming out of him soon, where the title is A Man of Ideas. Now, how did this movement grow? Again, the internet. You had the meetup groups. Ron Paul would do an interview on CNN, and 6 hours later, it would be posted on YouTube with 50,000 views. It was unbelievable. And then, starting, November 2007, we began to have organized fundraisers called money bombs. We had one in November 5th, which was Guy Fawkes Day. We raised $3.5 million. It was, I think, the most a Republican had ever raised in one day. So we organized another one, December 16th, 2007. We raised over $6 million in one day. It was the most amount of money any American politician ever raised in a 24-hour period. And even the most dedicated Ron Paul supporters just couldn't believe how big this had gotten. It really was it was a significant movement. And throughout the primaries, he got, when it was all said and done, 1.2 million votes. That's a significant chunk. It culminated just this past September here with the convention in Minneapolis. It was called the Rally for the Republic. And Ron Paul used that convention not only to get everyone together again to re-motivate, but also to roll out a new plan after the election season to keep the movement going. He calls it the Campaign for Liberty. And the website for that is campaignforliberty.com. And Ron Paul supporters are very techno-savvy. So what they've done is they've gotten every documented Ron Paul supporter they could into an internet database, and they're trying to recruit precinct leaders in every voting precinct in America to go around, door to door, grassroots, educate people on the issues. And the hope is that you just keep the numbers going exponentially and put people onto these ideas that nobody has talked about in maybe a century. At that convention, one interesting point is that less than a mile from where the Republicans were holding their convention, we had a grassroots fundraiser for a giant billboard, right next to that bridge in Minnesota that had collapsed at I-35. And the billboard was a quote from Ron Paul, and it said, "We're being taxed to blow up bridges in Iraq. Meanwhile, at home, our bridges are falling apart." Now, at this convention itself, the ideas discussed, we had a lot of speakers. Monetarily, there are quite a few speakers from the Mises Institute. You had Thomas Woods, Lou Rockwell, those figures. And what I found out is that I think we're a lot closer than most people would think. There's a lot more harmony than you would expect. There are two steps to this. You have to identify the problem and identify the solution. I think most of the Ron Paul supporters have identified the problem pretty well, and they are in total agreement with us on it. One thing actually I read in Alistair's Prosperity magazine, Stephen actually mentioned that too in an interview, where he said, the thing about Ron Paul is that he's not just talking about the consequences of our monetary system, he's talking about the underlying causes of the problems. And as a result, his supporters have become enlightened to a lot of things. They understand how the scam works. Like us, Jesse Ventura spoke at the convention, and he talked about the debt. $9 trillion in debt. And with the entitlement obligations, it comes out to something like 50 trillion. It's like $30,000 per capita. They understand how the Federal Reserve manipulates the business cycle, how they uniformly fix the interest rate. It's at a rate that no one is always going to agree with. So inevitably, you're going to have some malinvestment, too much money created in a certain sector, the bubble bursts, and then what's the response? Inflate even more. And it's the long-term operation of this cycle that erodes the middle class through constant inflation. How a $1913 is worth less than 4 cents today, I think. So Ron Paul, he's vocal, like us. He's vocal about the fact that the Federal Reserve is privately owned and it's a secretive institution. He's vocal about the fact that a central bank is a war machine. It promotes war systematically. In the tradition of Thomas Jefferson, he views private money control as unconstitutional. He would like to restore the issuing power to the government. He understands that the fractional reserve system is a problem, and he's against that system too. Another element of this entire movement is the very foundational idea. Richard Disterhorst mentioned this yesterday, that we must create change with nonviolent, peaceful revolution. One of the most popular signs in the Ron Paul movement was a sign that said Ron Paul Revolution, and letters 2 through 5 in the word revolution are love backwards, and we highlighted those words in red. So we have truth as our weapon, and it's peaceful in nature. So as you can see, we're in agreement on one aspect of it, which is the private control of money versus public control. What ideologically we don't agree on is the second part, which is the idea of money being an abstract legal concept as opposed to a commodity. The hard and soft money issue is where we diverge. However, we have to look at the differences in Ron Paul's ideology versus the difference in his practical solution. A lot of people just say, okay, Ron Paul, gold standard. That's incorrect. But if you look at his words, what he said in interviews, what he would actually carry out, he wouldn't bring us back to a gold standard. He would legalize gold and silver as things you can possess without having to pay a capital gains tax on them. That's basically what he would do. He would say, Party A can transact with Party B with anything they want. As the government, we can't outlaw two people's conscientious decisions. But we can issue our own currency on top of that, but gold and silver is the check on that, meaning you have to keep an honest fiat currency, otherwise people will naturally gravitate towards gold and silver. So I wouldn't say that's totally in disagreement with what we're saying here. I mean, at some point, you have to use discretion and you have to have an honest currency. And we're all in agreement on that. In some ways, though, Ron Paul is a contradiction. In one hand, you have Ron Paul, who ideologically worships Murray Rothbard. And Rothbard, if you've read What Has the Government Done to Our Money, Rothbard is in some ways an anarchist. He would rather eliminate Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 that says Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate its value. But at the same rate, you have Ron Paul, the constitutionalist. Ideologically, Ron Paul is a Rothbardian anarchist, but in practice, when he votes, he's a constitutionalist. One other fundamental difference that we have with the Ron Paul people is the idea that voluntary association through government can work. The Ron Paul people, especially Ron Paul himself, he said that government is fundamentally unable to exercise discretion. He talked about how Milton Friedman would like to fix monetary growth at 3%, but then Ron Paul came back and said, all right, but 3.5% sounds a lot better than 3%, and then 4% sounds better than 3.5%, and so on and so forth. So there's a fundamental distrust that we can voluntarily get together as a government and make good decisions without abusing the system over time. Another argument, actually when Stephen was presenting to the Ron Paul people in New York, one of the hardcore Austrians said that you're an inflationist. You want our money to go down in value. Money should go up in value. And this is an initial reaction of theirs. But then if you explain to them what happens when your money goes up in value, if you're holding money and it's going up in value, as opposed to the goods you can buy with money, then people hoard money, and money no longer serves as money. So they read these. People often you have to question them because they won't question themselves right away. So in the end, they have ideas, but there is no practical solution. My personal conversations with some of the Ron Paul supporters, I took some car rides up to them to New Hampshire. I spent about 5 weekends there going door to door for the primary. So we had these long conversations, and when I slowly explained to them the viewpoint of fiat currency, they do realize that yes, it is possible if we have the education and the knowledge to carry it out. It's just that right now we are not a knowledgeable enough country to be able to do it. So the issue then comes down to, all right, do we put commodity money as a check because people will never be responsible enough to run their own monetary system, or do you believe that you can educate people enough that we can actually work this out someday? But something that I came to think about, an issue brought up by our sociologist James from Las Vegas yesterday, was how do we get young people? The Ron Paul movement was about, I'd say, 75% young people at least. Going to these rallies, it's all college students. I mean, you have some older people, it's the people who have been in the know for a while. But most of these are college students who, found about Ron Paul on YouTube, watching the debates, and there's so much energy with these people, and they have no vehicle for it before. And these are people who can do simple math. They can put together A and B and realize that when they're a little older, this is an unsustainable fiscal mess we're in, so they're going to be screwed. So here's this guy who says, we need to get the government off our backs right now because they're just bankrupting us. So it resonated with young people a lot. But you work it out with them, you explain it to them over time, and you have debates with them. Then they kind of question their own beliefs that they automatically took from Murray Rothbard and Lou Rockwell. And then they realize that maybe what they said isn't totally right. There could be other ways. You have to approach things not just from an anarchist point of view. Another thing I think that we can do to tap into the young people is reaching out to local young Democrat and Republican organizations. Actually, just this past summer, I met the chairman of Manhattan Young Democrats in New York City. And I talked to him about monetary reform briefly. I asked him if Stephen could come in and talk to them at some point. So that's something we're going to try to arrange in the upcoming months. And I would encourage everyone to go to their local young Democrat organizations and try to explain these ideas to them, because these are people, again, who see that the financial system's broken, we're in an unsustainable mess, and currently no one has a viable solution for how to get out of it. So I think we can provide these young people with the proper ideas if we reach out to them. And finally, there's so much discontent out there, and I think if we can just reach people and tell them the truth, that that we can get them to take action, because people, this is what happened with the Ron Paul movement. Basically, people learned the truth, they became angry, and they were motivated to take action. And the amount of Democrats and mainstream Republicans out there who would be more open to our ideas than, say, the Austrian-school of economics, these people far outweigh in numbers the Austrians. So there are a lot of people out there who can be receptive to our message. We just have to go and reach out to them. And as James said, every significant movement starts with young people. Thank you.